welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're embarking on a really fascinating journey. We're unraveling a concept that, well, it profoundly shapes so much of our world, dogma. It's really at the heart of our beliefs, our communities, even our individual spiritual paths. We've pulled together a whole stack of sources, specifically looking into unraveling the source and course of dogma.
Yeah, and our mission today really is to go deep, to unpack what dogma actually is, how it forms, how it gets reinforced, and, it's huge impact.
Yeah.
Especially on spiritual development.
Right.
We'll look at how it shows up, its manifestations, and probably most importantly, explore what this means for you and how you understand complex ideas in your own life.
Okay, so to really unravel dogma, we need to start right at the core, don't we? Our sources point out something interesting, that it often takes root where fundamental truths aren't maybe immediately obvious.
Yeah.
So are you saying, like, if the foundation's a bit shaky, that's where dogma jumps in to create its own certainty?
Well, yeah, precisely. And here's a really crucial insight from the sources we looked at. Dogma often grows not from clarity, but from ambiguity. When those core tenets of a belief system aren't crystal clear, that's exactly when you see rigid dogma step in, to sort of fill the void.
Right. To provide an answer, even if it's not the only possible one.
Exactly. And historically, this almost always leads to, well, pretty intense struggles within organizations. They feel this need to establish and enforce one particular interpretation as the official, the orthodox view. A really classic historical example of this, the Nicene Creed. It basically established key articles of faith for Christian doctrines way back when, that whole process.
But as we dive deeper here, the sources also highlight a darker side to these struggles, don't they? What happens when these battles over interpretation actually start causing harm, inflicting suffering?
Yeah, that's a critical point. It seems these struggles for orthodoxy, they rarely happen without negative consequences, often leading to real pain, real suffering for those who hold views that end up being contrary to the established norm.
So it's not just intellectual disagreement.
No, not at all. And if you look at the most rigid forms of orthodoxy, they're clearly evident throughout the history of pretty much all religious movements.
Okay.
And since our focus in this deep dive is on how our understanding and actions affect spiritual development, we'll be concentrating mostly on how religious dogma shapes those individual spiritual paths.
So given all that, it might sound like dogma is just inherently bad, something to be avoided completely. But our sources, they're quite careful to emphasize that lots of factors shape it. It's not necessarily the dogma itself that's the problem.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is that the key thing isn't the dogma per se, but how it's administered, how it's imposed.
The application.
Right. That's what determines whether it becomes something that infuses spiritual awakening, helps it along, or actually stifles it, kills development.
Okay.
And this administration, this how, plays such a vital role in shaping attitudes and thinking within a group's membership. It connects directly to these concepts our sources call respect and submission. We'll probably circle back to those.
That's a really powerful distinction. So if that's what dogma is, broadly speaking, then the next big question our sources tackle is, how do we, maybe often without even realizing it, play a part in strengthening its grip? And the first big one seems to be this dogmatic approach to faith versus reason. Or you could say intuition versus intellect.
Yeah, that's a huge one. Dogmatic approaches often set these up as like a clear, irreconcilable difference. You have to choose one or the other.
Right. Mutually exclusive.
But what's compelling is the counter-argument from our sources. Look, there's no inherent reason why both can't exist totally in harmony within a person or even a society. In fact, they argue humans are kind of uniquely endowed with both. Intuition for necessary spiritual perception, right, which leads to spiritual growth through our life experiences.
Right, that inner knowing.
Exactly. And intellect to actually execute those intuitive promptings, turn them into deeds, allowing the spirit, that inner evolving part of us, to experience, learn, and grow.
That's a powerful idea, this kind of inherent dual endowment. So why then do dogmatic approaches seem so consistently to try and sever that connection, especially between intellect and faith?
Well, our sources highlight how this apparent split, this dichotomy, has become a really fundamental part of almost all spiritual dogma, specifically the exclusion of reason or intellect from matters of faith.
Yeah, you hear that a lot. Just have faith.
Right. And there's a real irony here, isn't there? Because, as the sources point out, modern leaders still absolutely use arguments which are products of reason and intellect to support their pronouncements to their congregations.
Good point. use reason to tell you not to use reason.
It's a paradox, yeah. And despite this enforcement, this pressure, the Spirit's desire for logic, as our sources phrase it, hasn't been totally squashed, even in matters of faith.
So it's still there under the surface.
It seems so. Many people might have just given up fighting it openly and remained silent, but that innate desire for things to make logical sense, it seems to persist within them.
Okay, so that's one mechanism. What else? Another key feature our sources highlight is the specific use of words and language.
Mm-hmm.
Dogma often encourages using passionate, maybe kind of vague words, designed to stir up strong feelings of upliftment or maybe dread, regardless of whether they actually apply logically.
Absolutely. And this language usually comes packaged with a certain demeanor, right? A tone suggesting authority or maybe piety, often mixed with this projected, almost theatrical humility.
Yeah, the performance aspect.
Yeah. And here's where it gets really problematic for individuals. Anyone in the group seeking clarification, maybe someone who just can't adopt that specific desired demeanor. They're quickly labeled spiritually immature, stubborn, maybe even rebellious.
Wow. So questioning is seen as a flaw.
Exactly. In matters of faith, the intellect and reason that we use in literally every other part of our earthly lives, suddenly discarded, thrown out the window.
You know, it's almost mind-boggling when you step back and think about it. Our sources give this really striking example. A dogmatic believer wouldn't even consider asking for a logical explanation of how, say, a physical body could just float up into heaven.
Right.
Without any equally logical explanation for how it might have descended in the first place. It really drives home this abandonment of basic reasoning.
That illustrates it perfectly. And building right on that, our sources identify another really powerful pillar supporting dogma. Unquestioning deference to a leader.
Ah, the authority figure.
Exactly. This deference is given solely based on their believed spiritual stature. It grants them this sort of cloak of omnipotence, infallibility, even when their failures and shortcomings are, frankly, quite obvious.
So in those situations, a dogmatic believer just automatically shuts out any reasoning, believing they're being, true and loyal.
That's the mindset, yeah. But interestingly, if you actually review their own core teachings, often that attitude is shown to be misplaced, even wrong according to the original principles. Our sources argue that the original pure spiritual messages, that unadulterated wisdom, actually point towards something else, what they call the laws of creation as the ultimate unchanging standard for judging all our thoughts and actions, not a person.
So what's presented as loyalty to a leader, it actually morphs into something else.
It becomes a form of idolatry, essentially, making the leader a new idol of worship, replacing the core principles.
Wow.
And this leads us very naturally to another core concept that really fosters problematic dogma.
Rigidity.
Rigidity. Okay, how do sources define that? It's essentially just inflexibility, an inability to expand concepts or ideas or to accommodate change. A rigid doctrine or a rigid person is literally just stuck in a particular worldview. Can't see beyond it.
And the irony there, I suppose.
Oh, the irony is profound. Such organizations, and often their members, they're unlikely to even recognize the core tenets of their own religion if those tenets are presented in different words or a different context.
Really?
Yeah. Think about it. Even though, say, the Abrahamic religions all stem from the same roots, founded on basically the same core principles, like the Ten Commandments, for example, each one often seems completely unable to recognize the truth present in the others.
Why is that?
Because, the sources argue, they've evolved these elaborate dogmas woven around specific interpretations and rituals rather than staying focused on the spirit, the essence of their basic message.
Gotcha. Lost the forest for the trees, maybe.
Something like that. And this rigidity, it makes it impossible for dogmatic believers to see manifestations of the basic laws that supposedly form their beliefs when those laws show up out of context.
Like where?
Well, for example, they might not connect the laws governing the cosmos or physical sciences with their spiritual teachings at all.
Okay.
So they completely miss the relationship between, say, the spiritual law of sowing and reaping karma, cause and effect, and the material law of action and reaction that governs physics.
Ah, so they miss the universal patterns.
Exactly, which means they miss out on a huge opportunity, learning profound spiritual lessons just by observing how the physical world works. And what's really interesting, or maybe concerning, is that this isn't just some ancient phenomenon.
That's still happening.
Oh, yeah. New religious organizations forming today, maybe around new messages. They're often weaving the exact same kinds of dogma, using rigid interpretations and rituals to control members.
And using the same tactics.
Often, yes, the same tactics. Very high-sounding words, lots of deep passion, that contrived humility we mentioned, used almost as a weapon or a shield against any kind of disturbance or questioning.
And when the promotion of the doctrine becomes forceful, dictatorial even.
Well, that approach, with its heavy emphasis on orthodoxy and ritual over the actual spirit of the message, it can significantly affect how the message spreads, or even if it survives. Leaders might even resort to veiled threats to keep members in line.
And historically.
Historically, this kind of rigid, forceful approach actually accounts for the disappearance of many ancient religions that were once incredibly powerful.
How so?
Think about those powerful priesthoods in the ancient world. Many collapsed pretty quickly when their members, who'd been silently submitting to these authoritarian tactics, suddenly found and eagerly embraced new faiths that offered greater spiritual freedom.
So the rigidity created the conditions for its own collapse.
In many cases, yes. And another example, maybe one people don't often think about, the spread of Christianity in places like the Americas or Africa. Our sources suggest it wasn't just military conquest. A big factor was the intense desire among many indigenous populations for freedom from the yoke of their own tyrannical priests, and also the pervasive fear in some cultures of being selected for sacrificial offerings that alone kept many people from ever daring to ask questions.
Wow, that puts a different perspective on it. And this brings us kind of full circle, doesn't it? Back to the crucial role of respect and submission in how dogma gets enforced.
Absolutely. It's clear from the sources that enforced submission is a powerful tool for promoting dogma. Why? Because it simply doesn't allow for contrary views, even if those views could genuinely help the organization adapt or deepen its understanding.
And the inability to even entertain different views. That's basically a lack of respect, isn't it?
It's a fundamental lack of respect, yes. It's based on the thinking that those other views simply have nothing valuable to offer. Dogma, especially in its rigid form, leaves absolutely no room for the give and take that our sources say is demanded by the law of balance in human relationships.
Or for the law of love.
Or for the law of love, exactly, which they say is embodied in respect and fundamentally calls for supporting each individual's spiritual growth, not controlling it.
Okay. But it's important to clarify here, right? The law of love, according to these sources, doesn't mean just accepting any view, especially errant ones that contradict or distort these fundamental laws of creation we've mentioned.
Absolutely not. That's a key distinction. However, it also does not call for anyone to force another person into submission. Ever.
Why not?
Because the laws of creation themselves have built-in corrective measures. They ensure that learning happens through experience, through consequences. Nature teaches, essentially.
So what does a responsible non-dogmatic approach look like then?
Well, the sources suggest something like this. First, genuinely try to see the other person's perspective, understand where they're coming from.
Okay, empathy first.
Right. Then, gradually, gently, try to lead them from their current level of understanding into higher recognitions. It's a process. Exclusion, like asking someone to leave a group, should really only be considered as a last resort.
When would that be appropriate?
Only if this guiding approach completely fails and the person remains totally intransigent and they actively try to force their own errant view onto the rest of the congregation.
I see. So it's about protecting the group, but only after trying to help the individual.
Precisely. This whole approach entails genuine respect. It avoids imposition. The focus shifts entirely to helping a fellow human spirit come to their own recognitions, their own acceptance of the laws of creation.
So they can pursue their own individual journey within those laws.
Completely free of some imposed dogmatic interpretation from outside.
Okay, so boiling it all down then.
Yeah, to sort of synthesize our discussion, dogma itself, not inherently negative, but it can become seriously detrimental through rigid administration, through the suppression of reason, through that unquestioned deference to leaders and the enforcement of submission, all of which ultimately can really stifle individual spiritual growth.
Right. So considering everything we've discussed today, the origins, the perpetuation of dogma, here's maybe the final thought for you, the listener. How might an awareness of these patterns, these ways dogmatic thinking and behavior operate, how might that help you navigate and critically assess information, ideas, and relationships in any area of your life, not just religious contexts? What would be the laws of creation, those fundamental truths or principles that you choose to base your own understanding on? Something to think about.